He built this hotel from nothing.
One look, one judgment. She didn't see an owner, blur, she saw a problem.
Sir, I don't think this is the right hotel for you.
She had no idea who she was talking to. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just showed them who really owned the building. Marcus Bell had flown across 3 time zones, driven 45 minutes through traffic, and carried his exhausted 8-year-old daughter's backpack on top of his own just to reach the front doors of the Meridian Grand Hotel, a place he had built brick by brick, deal by deal, over 12 grueling years. If you've ever been judged by the way you look instead of who you really are, you already know exactly where this story is going, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Before we get into it, hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be heard by as many people as possible. Marcus wasn't always the man in the tailored blazer carrying a 6-figure investment portfolio. He grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in East Cleveland with his mother working double shifts at a diner and his father absent more often than present. What Marcus did have was an unshakable belief that the world owed him nothing, but that didn't mean he couldn't go out and take what he'd earned. He studied finance on a partial scholarship, slept in his car more nights than he'd like to admit during his first year out of college, and eventually clawed his way into hospitality investment, an industry that, ironically, would later try to deny him the very dignity he'd spent his life building toward. By the time he turned 32, Marcus had quietly acquired a controlling stake in the Meridian Grand, a struggling boutique hotel chain on the verge of bankruptcy. He poured his savings, his weekends, and his sleepless nights into resurrecting it. He renegotiated supplier contracts, retrained staff, redesigned the guest experience from the ground up, and within 4 years, the Meridian Grand had gone from a sinking ship to one of the most celebrated luxury chains on the East Coast. But Marcus never wanted his face plastered across billboards. He preferred to stay behind the scenes, quietly visiting his properties unannounced, dressed simply, watching how his staff treated ordinary guests when they thought no executives were watching. It was the only way to know the truth. That particular evening, Marcus wasn't planning an inspection at all. He was simply a tired father trying to get his daughter to bed. Zoe's mother, Marcus's ex-wife, had passed away from a sudden illness 2 years prior, leaving Marcus as Zoe's sole parent. Since then, every trip, every late flight, every hotel check-in had become a quiet negotiation between exhaustion and love. That night, they'd flown in from a charity gala in Chicago, Zoe asleep against his shoulder for most of the flight, and all Marcus wanted was a warm bed for his little girl before continuing on to his corporate office downtown in the morning. He chose the Meridian Grand on 5th, the very flagship hotel that had relaunched his career, because it felt safe, familiar, home in a strange way. He hadn't visited that particular property in nearly 8 months, busy expanding into 2 new cities, and the staff rotation had changed significantly since his last unannounced visit. He didn't think anything of it. He was, after all, just a guest checking in with his daughter, the same as he'd done 100 times before. The lobby was as breathtaking as he remembered. Soaring marble columns, a crystal chandelier the size of a small car, soft jazz piping through hidden speakers. Zoe, despite her sleepiness, perked up at the sight of the glittering ceiling, whispering, "Daddy, it's so pretty," squeezing her stuffed rabbit tighter. Marcus smiled down at her, that small private joy fathers feel when their children find wonder in ordinary places. He walked them both to the front desk, set his driver's license and a black credit card on the marble counter, and gave his name. The young woman behind the desk, a clerk named Brittany, who had only been with the hotel for 6 weeks, looked at Marcus, then glanced past him toward the parking valet, as if expecting someone else to be standing there. Someone in a suit that matched the wealth she assumed should accompany a 5-star reservation. Her eyes flicked down to Marcus's casual travel clothes, his daughter's slightly wrinkled yellow dress, the worn edges of his leather travel bag, and something in her expression shifted, hardened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, sliding his ID back across the counter without even checking the reservation system. "I don't see anything under this name, and honestly, this might not be the right hotel for you. There are some more affordable options about 10 minutes down the road." Marcus blinked, momentarily certain he had misheard her. "I'm sorry, I have a reservation." "Could you check again?" Brittany's colleague, an older man named Dale, who had worked front desk for nearly 3 years, leaned over and added without looking at the screen, We're actually fully booked tonight for premium guests. I'd hate for there to be any kind of issue. The phrase any kind of issue hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt the familiar exhausting weight settle onto his shoulders. The same weight he'd felt walking into banks for business loans years earlier. The same weight he'd felt being followed through department stores as a teenager. The same weight every black father in America carries silently, hoping today won't be the day it happens in front of his child. He glanced down at Zoe, whose small hand had instinctively tightened around his fingers, her sleepy eyes now wide and alert, sensing something was wrong even if she couldn't name it. "Can I speak to your manager?" Marcus asked, his voice level, controlled, though something in his chest had begun to burn. "He's not available right now," Dale said flatly, already turning his attention to a laptop screen, dismissing them. A small crowd of other guests near the lobby seating began to notice the slight pause in their conversations, the way eyes drifted toward the father and daughter standing at the counter. Someone murmured something Marcus couldn't quite hear, followed by a soft, uncomfortable chuckle. Zoe, picking up on the tension despite her age, tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we just go to a different hotel?" she whispered, her voice small and tired. It would have been so easy. Marcus could have turned around, walked back out through those revolving doors, and found another hotel. He had the resources, the connections, the ability to disappear into anonymity and avoid the confrontation altogether. But something in him refused to move, not for his own pride, but because he thought of every other father who didn't have the resources he had, every other family who would have simply been turned away with no recourse, swallowing the humiliation in silence because speaking up felt too dangerous, too exhausting, too futile. "I built this hotel," Marcus said quietly, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Brittany let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Sir, I really think it's time for you to leave before we have to call security." That was the moment Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and withdrew a slim black leather case. Inside was his executive ownership badge, the kind only senior leadership and board members carried, embossed with the Meridian Grand Crest and his full name in gold lettering. Marcus A. Bell, Chief Executive Officer. He set it gently on the counter, the way a man sets down a card he's held quietly for years, never needing to play it until tonight. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Dale's face drained of color almost instantly, his hands frozen above the laptop keys. Brittany picked up the badge with trembling fingers, turning it over twice, as though hoping it might reveal itself as a forgery. It didn't. The crest was unmistakable. The signature beneath his title matched the one on every internal memo she'd ever half-read during onboarding. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but carrying a weight that silenced the murmuring guests around them. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic respect. That's not how hospitality works. That's not how humanity works." Within minutes, the general manager, a man named Richard Coleman, came rushing out from the back office, his tie crooked, sweat already forming at his temples as he'd clearly been alerted by a panicked internal call. "Mr. Bell, sir, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea you were arriving tonight. Please, let me." "This isn't about advance notice, Richard," Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. "This is about how my daughter and I were treated standing right here, in front of other guests, for the crime of not looking the way your staff expected a guest of this hotel to look." Richard's eyes flicked nervously toward Brittany and Dale, both standing frozen, the weight of the situation crashing down on them in real time. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. He simply asked Richard to review the lobby's security footage from the past 15 minutes. Footage that would later be shared, with names blurred for privacy, but message intact, across the hotel's internal training program as a case study in unconscious bias and customer discrimination. By the next morning, both Brittany and Dale had been terminated, not out of cruel vengeance, but because the Meridian Grand's policy on guest discrimination was unambiguous. A policy Marcus himself had written into the employee handbook years earlier after hearing one too many stories from friends and colleagues about similar humiliations at other hotels. It wasn't about punishing two young employees out of spite. It was about ensuring that no other father, no other family would ever stand in that lobby and feel smaller than the marble beneath their feet. What surprised the staff who remained, and later the public when the story quietly made its way into local news, wasn't that Marcus fired two employees on the spot. It was what he did afterward. Instead of simply moving on, Marcus initiated a mandatory company-wide training program on implicit bias, partnered with a diversity consulting firm, and personally sat down with every front desk team across all 12 of his properties to share, in his own words, what it felt like to stand in his own building and be told he didn't belong. He didn't do it for publicity. He did it because Zoe had asked him a question that night, tucked into the hotel bed hours later, room finally secured, crisis resolved. "Daddy," she'd whispered, half asleep, "why didn't that lady want us here?" Marcus had sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before answering, choosing his words the way he chose every important decision in his life, carefully, deliberately, with his daughter's future in mind. "Sometimes," he said softly, "people make up their minds about who you are before they ever get to know you. It's not fair and it's not right. But you know what matters more than what they think. What you know to be true about yourself." Zoe considered this with the particular seriousness only children seem capable of. "So what's true about us?" Marcus smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "That we belong everywhere we choose to be. That kindness and hard work built this place, and nobody, not one single person, gets to decide we don't deserve it." The story of that night spread slowly at first, shared by a guest who had witnessed the exchange and posted about it online, praising not the firing itself, but the grace and composure Marcus had shown throughout, refusing to humiliate Brittany and Dale further than the situation already had, refusing to turn his daughter's bedtime into a public spectacle, choosing education over public shaming as his long-term response. Major news outlets eventually picked it up, framing it not as a story of revenge, but as a story about the quiet, persistent dignity required to navigate a world that still far too often judges people before it knows them. Marcus never sought the spotlight that followed. He gave one brief interview, choosing his words as carefully as he had with Zoe that night. "This isn't really about me," he told the reporter. "I had the power to change the outcome of that moment. Most people don't. My hope isn't that people remember my name. It's that the next time someone walks into a business, any business, and doesn't fit someone's narrow idea of who belongs there, the person behind that counter pauses just for a second and chooses to see a human being instead of a stereotype." Months later, the Meridian Grand's new diversity training program had been adopted, in part or in full, by 3 other independent hotel chains who'd reached out after hearing about what happened. Brittany, in an unexpected twist, reached out to Marcus's office months after her termination, not to ask for her job back, but to apologize directly and ask if she could volunteer with the very biased training program born from her mistake. Marcus, after a long conversation, agreed, believing, as he always had, that growth mattered more than punishment, that people could change if given an honest mirror and the humility to look into it. As for Zoe, she grew up hearing that story not as a tale of anger, but as a lesson in quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard, the kind that turns humiliation into change rather than bitterness. Years later, when she was old enough to understand the full weight of what had happened that night in the lobby, she asked her father if he ever regretted handling it so calmly, so without rage. "No," Marcus told her, the same steady warmth in his voice she remembered from that hotel room years before. "Rage gets you noticed, grace gets you remembered. And I wanted them to remember exactly why they were wrong." That night in the Meridian Grand lobby wasn't just about a denied room or 2 lost jobs. It was a reminder that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, no matter how they look at you, no matter what assumptions they make in the first 3 seconds of meeting you. It's something you carry within yourself. The same way Marcus carried his daughter's hand that night, gently, protectively, refusing to let go, no matter how heavy the moment became. And if there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this. True power isn't found in the badge you carry or the title on your business card. It's found in the choice to lead with grace, even when the world hands you every reason to do otherwise. And in teaching the next generation, one quiet bedtime conversation at a time, that they belong everywhere they choose to be.